Saturday mornings in the 80s hit different. You'd roll out of bed, pour a mountain of cereal, and park yourself in front of the TV like it was a sacred ritual. The theme songs, the cliffhangers, the toy commercials disguised as adventures, it was pure magic. But here's the part most of us didn't catch at the time. A lot of those shows started their lives as comic books. Before they were blasting across your TV, they were tucked inside spinner racks at the local shop, building entire worlds panel by panel. Then the animators got involved, and things got big, really big. If this trip back to the 80s hits a soft spot, hit the super thanks to help keep these stories alive. And check the description for DVD links if you want to relive the classics for real. Now, there's no better place to start than with the most jacked hero in furry briefs ever swung a sword.
By the power of Grayskull!
Before He-Man was shouting, "By the power of Grayskull" across living rooms, he existed in the pages of a comic book. DC Comics helped flesh out the early lore, filling the gaps the toy line couldn't explain. In those pages, Eternia wasn't just a backdrop for action figures. It was a world with tangled family ties, forgotten magic, and a villain whose skull wasn't just for show. Skeletor's connection to He-Man, Castle Grayskull's mysteries, and the balance between good and evil were all sketched out before a single frame ever hit TV. Then came Filmation's 1983 cartoon, the version that turned it all into legend. The budget wasn't huge, so the animators got creative, looping backgrounds, recycled fight poses, the same few sword swings used a dozen times. But kids didn't notice. They were glued to the screen, soaking up a mix of action, fantasy, and those end-of-episode moral lessons that tried to convince you to clean your room or be nice to your sister. What started out as a few comic tie-ins became one of the biggest cartoons of the decade, a full-on cultural movement. Lunchboxes, bedsheets, Halloween costumes, you name it. He-Man became the face of the 80s power fantasy, a hero who somehow made bare-chested sword fights look wholesome. And He-Man wasn't the only one making the leap from page to screen. Another crew of heroes was about to pounce on the TV with one of the loudest openings of the decade. Few shows from the 80s hit like Thundercats. The theme song alone could wake up the whole house. Guitars, lightning, and a giant cat logo coming right at you. But before Lion-O and his crew were leaping across TV screens, they were living in the pages of Marvel's Star Comics, the kid-friendly branch of Marvel that handled everything from the Muppets to He-Man tie-ins. Those comics went deeper than you might think. They showed how Thundera was destroyed, how the Thundercats escaped, and even gave the mutants some backstory instead of just making them generic bad guys. It built the bones of the world before the cartoon ever roared to life. Then came 1985, and suddenly, Thundercats was everywhere. The animation looked better than most Saturday morning shows, the tone was darker, and the world felt huge. These weren't perfect heroes, they were survivors, trying to rebuild on a new planet while being hunted by a half-mummified sorcerer named Mum-Ra, who looked like he crawled straight out of a nightmare. The mix of fantasy and sci-fi was what made it so special. Laser blasters, magic swords, spaceships, and ancient prophecies all mashed together into something that just worked. The comics gave it a world, the cartoon gave it style, and that opening yell, "Thundercats ho!" still gives every 80s kid goosebumps. If Thundercats ruled the land, SilverHawks took the same energy and launched it straight into space. It came from the same creative team, but this time the heroes were partly metal, partly real, defending the galaxy from a space mob boss named Monstar, who somehow managed to look terrifying and fabulous at the same time. Marvel's Star comic line picked it up early, giving fans a little extra story that the show didn't have time for. The comics dove into the team's origins, how they were chosen, and even what turned Monstar into a nightmare with a metal mane. It was classic 80s sci-fi, weird and way cooler than it had any right to be. The cartoon itself, pure spectacle. Chrome armor gleaming across space, laser guitars shredding mid-battle, and villains who looked like they just walked off a glam rock album cover. The animation was slick for the time, with enough sparkle to make your TV glow. But it wasn't just flash, the show had heart too. Commander Stargazer kept everyone grounded, and the team's chemistry made the galaxy feel surprisingly human. SilverHawks never got as big as Thundercats, but it earned a loyal fan base that still hums the theme song today. It was flashy, futuristic, and unapologetically 80s. Every time someone says partly metal, partly real, you can almost hear that electric guitar kick in and see a silver wing slicing through the stars. If you grew up in the 80s, you already know dinosaurs automatically made anything cooler, and Dino-Riders didn't just know that, it doubled down. The concept was simple but genius: time-traveling humans, laser blasters, and dinosaurs with armor. It was every kid's imagination crammed into one Saturday morning slot. Marvel got involved through a comic tie-in that gave the chaos a little structure. The books set up the war between the heroic Valorians and the evil Rollons, alien species battling out after crash landing on prehistoric Earth. The comics filled in the stuff the show barely touched, like why these aliens could talk to dinosaurs and why the bad guys looked like a mashup of snakes, bugs, and nightmares. In 1998, the cartoon only lasted one season, 14 episodes, but it packed a lot in. The animation was clean, the pacing was fast, and the toy line, unreal. You had fully detailed dinosaurs with removable armor, weapon mounts, and little rider figures that actually fit on top. If you owned a T-Rex or a Triceratops from that line, you were basically royalty at recess. Sure, Dino-Riders disappeared as fast as it came, but it never really went extinct. Between the comics and the toys, it carved out a tiny prehistoric corner of 80s pop culture fans still dig up today. Laser-firing dinosaurs? Honestly, how could that ever fail? If there's one show that defined 80s Saturday mornings, it's Transformers. Before Optimus Prime became everyone's favorite space dad, the whole thing started as a Marvel comic meant to sell toys, and somehow turned into one of the most enduring universes in pop culture. The comics came first in 1984, and they did a lot of heavy lifting. Writer Bob Budiansky didn't just script the stories, he actually named most of the characters, wrote their bios, and built the personalities that would later hit TV. Without Marvel, you wouldn't have the noble Optimus, the ruthless Megatron, or the countless fan favorites like Starscream, Soundwave, and Bumblebee. Then came the cartoon, giant transforming robots fighting for the fate of Earth, and Cybertron. Instant classic. The animation wasn't perfect, but kids didn't care. The voices, the sound effects, the theme song, it was all electric. And unlike most shows, Transformers wasn't afraid to get dark. Characters actually died, planets exploded, and every episode ended with the promise of another battle. The comic and the cartoon worked hand in hand, one expanding the lore, the other blasting it into living rooms around the world. It was more than a toy commercial. It was a myth about loyalty, war, and big metal heroes that could turn into cars. Even now, decades later, just hearing Autobots roll out can transport you right back to the carpet, cereal bowl in hand, watching robots save the world one Saturday at a time.
Be worrying about Cobra Commander. Pythona! You will all come with me now. No! No! Nemesis Enforcer, fetch Cobra Commander. No! Release me! I order you to let me go! No!
Where are you taking the others?
Before it was blasting across TVs, G.I. Joe started as one of the smartest comic toy crossovers Marvel ever pulled off. The A Real American Hero comic hit shelves in 1982, and writer Larry Hama basically built the whole universe from scratch. He gave every soldier a code name, a backstory, and even psychological quirks. stuff you never got from a plastic action figure. The comics weren't just explosions and patriotism, they had politics, betrayal, and surprisingly emotional moments. Then came the cartoon in 1983, and suddenly, Cobra Commander's screeching voice and those endless laser battles were everywhere. The animation was classic 80s, full of reused shots, but kids didn't care. The theme song alone made you sit up straight. Every episode was packed with tanks flipping, jets roaring, and lessons tacked on at the end that started with, "And now you know," and ended with, "And knowing is half the battle." What made G.I. Joe stand out was its mix of realism and ridiculousness. You had ninjas like Snake Eyes fighting alongside flamethrower guys and mad scientists, yet it somehow worked. The show kept things bad and bold, while the Marvel comics gave it depth and grit. Together, they turned a simple toy line into a full-on American legend. A world of colorful heroes, cartoon chaos, and pure Saturday morning adrenaline. Yo, Joe.
So how do we get out?
There is no way out.
Well, that's kind of a defeatist attitude, don't you think? What about that?
Believe it or not, the Turtles didn't start out as pizza-loving goofballs. When Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles first hit the scene in 1984, it was a black and white indie comic from Mirage Studios. Dark, gritty, and full of parody. It poked fun at the serious superhero stories of the time, especially Daredevil and Ronin. The Turtles were assassins trained by a rat sensei, and the streets of New York were anything but cartoon-friendly. Then came 1987, and everything changed. The cartoon turned these underground ninjas into global icons. The violence was toned down, the shadows brightened up, and suddenly, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo were cracking jokes, eating pizza, and fighting Shredder to the catchiest theme song ever written. The show exploded. Toys, lunchboxes, arcade games, you name it. Every kid wanted to shout "Cowabunga" and spin kick in the air. But what's easy to forget is that it still kept a little of that comic book DNA. The brotherhood, the underdog story, the mix of humor and danger, it all came from Mirage's original pages. By blending that grit with 80s cartoon charm, the Turtles became something no one saw coming, a perfect mix of action and comedy that still hasn't been topped. It started as a joke and it ended up a pop culture empire. Not bad for 4 mutated reptiles living in a sewer.
Where's the blacksmith? I would speak with him.
It's Rathaman, his evilest legend.
My sword, I must get it.
Before laser swords and talking animals took over Saturday mornings, there was Conan the Barbarian, the original muscle and magic hero. Marvel's long-running Conan the Barbarian comics had been going on strong since the 70s, and they were intense. Savage sword fights, haunted temples, and a brooding warrior who solved problems by swinging first and asking questions never. It was violent, pulpy, and written for older readers who loved fantasy done the hard way. When the idea of a Conan cartoon came along in the late 80s, the challenge was obvious. How do you take a comic known for decapitations and turn it into something a kid can watch before breakfast? The result was Conan the Adventurer. It toned down the blood, added a magic phoenix sidekick, and replaced the beheadings with banishing evil. But somehow, it still worked. The world stayed full of curses, ancient relics, and snaky villains led by Wrath Amon. It was a safe, Saturday morning version of sword and sorcery that still managed to feel epic. The Marvel Comics gave the series its bones. The wandering hero, the code of honor, the endless struggle between freedom and tyranny. The cartoon just swapped gore for glitter and made the fantasy accessible to a younger crowd. It wasn't as big as He-Man or Thundercats, but it scratched that same itch for adventure. For a generation of kids, Conan the Adventurer was the first time they swung a broom like a broadsword, and that's a legacy any barbarian would be proud of.
Don't worry, Ogre. My tank contains liquid hydrogen. If they shoot me, we all die.
You might want to tell them that.
Now here's one that slipped under most parents' radar, and probably gave a few kids nightmares. Inhumanoids was easily one of the greatest and strangest, creepiest cartoons to ever sneak onto Saturday morning TV. It came from a Marvel toy tie-in, but instead of colorful heroes and catchphrases, you got monsters clawing their way out from the Earth's core. The comics actually went darker than the show, diving into the origins of these giant beasts called Metlar, Tendril, and Decompose. They weren't just villains. They were ancient horrors trapped beneath the planet, and humanity was dumb enough to dig them out. The Earth Corps, basically scientists in power armor, were the only ones standing between civilization and total monster takeover. When the cartoon hit in 1986, it was wild. Goo-covered monsters melting buildings, skeleton-faced creatures screaming in echoing caves. It looked more like a horror movie than a toy commercial. The animation was gritty, the tone was unsettling, and somehow it still aired alongside G.I. Joe reruns. Parents wrote letters, kids couldn't look away. It didn't last long, but Inhumanoids earned a cult following because it dared to be weird. It wasn't polished or safe, it was pure, unfiltered 80s imagination with a side of nightmare fuel. For every kid who watched it through their fingers, there's still a part of them that hears that deep, rumbling theme song and thinks, yeah, maybe monsters were kinda cool.
Hey babe, I got my eye on you. I would really like to make you mine.
Jem and the Holograms was pure 80s pop culture turned up to 11. Totally unapologetic. It kicked off in Marvel's Star Comics line, which acted like a backstage pass into Jem's world. Fans got a closer look at Jerrica Benton's double life, running a record label by day and moonlighting as a holographic pop icon by night. The comics didn't push the fashion and fame, they added heart. You saw the jealousy, the loyalty, the creative struggles that made the story feel bigger than a toy shelf tie-in. When the cartoon hit in 1985, it was like someone plugged Saturday morning into an amp. The show mixed fashion, music videos, and soap opera drama in a way no one had ever seen before. Every episode was a spectacle. Glitter explosions, laser lights, sabotage from the Misfits, and songs that still get stuck in your head decades later. And in between the glam, it actually had something to say about identity, friendship, and being brave enough to stand out. What made Jem special was how fearless it was. It didn't care about fitting in or playing it safe. It proved that a girls' show could be stylish, smart, and powerful all at once. The animation had flair, the soundtrack had bite, and the message hit home. That being different was the most outrageous thing you could be. Even now, Jem and the Holograms still shines as one of the boldest and most joyful cartoons of the decade. Truly, truly outrageous. And that's the lineup. Comics that didn't just get adapted, they blew up into some of the most unforgettable cartoons of the 80s. Some were massive hits, others crashed and burned, but every single one left its mark. What made them special wasn't the marketing or the toys, it was the imagination. Artists, writers, and animators taking wild ideas from a few comic panels and turning them into worlds we still talk about decades later. If this nostalgia trip hit home, tap that super thanks button to help keep these stories alive. And yeah, the DVD links are down in the description if you're ready to binge the chaos all over again. Now here's the real question. Which one of these shows was your favorite back in the day? Or better yet, which one deserves a comeback? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading them all. Thanks for watching, and as every 80s hero probably said before the freeze frame ending, stay righteous.